There comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that letting go is not losing a man. It's finding herself again. When a woman chooses to let go, something extraordinary happens that most people never fully understand. Letting go is not the loud storm of a broken heart. It is the quiet shift of energy that transforms the entire dynamic between a man and a woman. Because for so long, he may have lived inside the comfort of her presence, her patience, her efforts, her constant emotional availability. He may not have realized how deeply this energy supported him. He may not have noticed how much of his confidence was built on her reassurance, how much of his comfort came from her consistency, how much of his emotional peace came from the way she showed up every time without fail. But when she lets go, when she steps back not in anger but in truth, the illusion of control he once had suddenly collapses. He no longer holds the power of assumption. He no longer carries the silent belief that she will always be there no matter how little effort he gives. Letting go becomes the disruption that forces him to see what he had been blind to, that love does not stay when it is not fed, and a woman does not continue when she is not valued. This shift is not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not chaotic, but it's seismic. It shakes him in places he didn't know existed, because until she let go, she was carrying the emotional weight of the connection. She was the one checking in, smoothing misunderstandings, giving the benefit of the doubt, keeping the spark alive, making the effort he felt entitled to. But when she stops, he feels the emptiness. The conversations become shorter, the connection becomes colder, the attention he thought he deserved suddenly disappears, and the silence that replaces her presence becomes heavy enough to wake him up. When a woman lets go, she breaks the pattern. She interrupts the emotional cycle that kept him comfortable. And men don't react to words, they react to patterns, they react to shifts in energy. They react to the absence of what they once took for granted. And letting go is the deepest energetic shift she can create. It is the moment she stops fighting for the connection and starts fighting for her soul. It is the moment she chooses clarity over illusion, peace over chaos, self-respect over empty promises. And something powerful happens in this moment. He starts seeing her differently. Not as the woman who needs him, but as the woman who chooses herself. Not as the woman who chases, but as the woman who withdraws with dignity. Not as the woman who waits, but as the woman who understands her worth. This emotional pivot hits a man harder than any argument, any ultimatum, or any confrontation ever could. Because letting go introduces him to a truth he was ignoring, that he was losing a woman he didn't know how to keep. And in that realization, he falls harder, deeper, and more honestly than he ever did when she was right there in front of him. When a woman steps back and finally lets go, something profound happens inside a man. Something he never prepared for. Without her presence constantly guiding the emotional temperature of the relationship, he is forced to confront the very parts of himself he had been avoiding. Because while she was there, offering love, reassurance, stability, and emotional understanding, he didn't have to face his own fears. He didn't have to confront his insecurities. He didn't have to acknowledge the emotional gaps he carried. Her presence acted as a cushion. Her consistency covered the holes in his own heart. Her love was a blanket over the parts of himself he wasn't ready to deal with. But the moment she lets go, that blanket is gone. And suddenly, he is left alone with nothing but his own inner world. A world he may not like, a world he may have run from, a world her love once softened. Men often underestimate the emotional labor a woman contributes to a relationship. They don't realize how much she carries because she carries it quietly. She doesn't announce every moment she supports him. She doesn't declare every moment she chooses compassion over frustration. She doesn't point out how many times she holds the space emotionally so the relationship can breathe. She does these things naturally, lovingly, instinctively. But when she steps back, when she stops reaching out, stops checking in, stops repairing the cracks he ignored, he suddenly feels the weight of everything she used to hold. He begins to see the emotional distance he contributed to. He begins to feel the lack of intimacy he assumed didn't matter. He begins to experience the emptiness where her energy once lived. And that emptiness isn't just loneliness, it's a confrontation. It forces him to face questions he avoided. Why didn't he step up? Why didn't he invest more? Why didn't he value her when he had her? Why did he allow his fears to drive him away from the very thing he needed? A man's ego can defend him from truth while she is still there, but the moment she leaves, the ego loses its protection. Her absence becomes a mirror, and that mirror reflects what he tried to hide: his emotional immaturity, his unspoken fears, his avoidance of vulnerability. Suddenly, he realizes that the connection didn't fall apart because she wasn't enough. It fell apart because he didn't show up fully. In this state, he begins to feel everything he refused to feel before: the love he denied, the vulnerability he avoided, the appreciation he suppressed. When she lets go, it doesn't mean she stops loving. It means she stops sacrificing herself, and that realization hits him harder than the loss itself. He begins to see her value not through her effort, but through her absence. And this is why men fall harder, not because she played a game, but because her letting go awakened the truth he was too blind to see while she was still standing in front of him. There comes a moment when a woman finally pulls her energy back, not to punish, not to manipulate, not to create drama, but simply because she recognizes that she has given more of herself than the connection deserved. This moment is powerful because it marks the shift from emotional dependency to emotional autonomy. When a woman lets go, she doesn't just walk away from a man, she walks back into her own power. She stops centering her life around how he feels, what he wants, or whether he will choose her. Instead, she begins to center herself, her peace, her joy, her standards, her future. And the moment she does this, she transforms in ways a man cannot ignore. For so long, she may have been doing the emotional heavy lifting, adjusting her expectations, softening her boundaries, giving more chances, extending more grace. These actions come naturally to her because she believes in love, she believes in effort, and she believes in the potential she sees in both the connection and the man. But when she lets go, that belief turns inward. She begins to invest in the potential of her own life rather than the potential of his inconsistency. She stops trying to hold the connection together and begins to hold herself together. She no longer attaches her worth to whether he stays or goes, and this shift in her energy changes everything. A woman who lets go becomes more confident, not because she never cared, but because she finally chooses herself. Her body relaxes, her mind becomes clearer, and her heart feels lighter. Instead of waiting for messages, she starts making plans. Instead of hoping for clarity, she creates it. Instead of questioning her value, she embodies it. This transformation radiates from her through her voice, her posture, her presence, and a man feels it even from a distance. When she stops overgiving, he sees how much she truly gave. When she stops chasing, he sees how much she once pursued. When she stops initiating, he realizes how heavily he relied on her effort. Her absence reveals the gap between what he thought he contributed and what she actually carried. And this is when the shift in attraction begins. Because a woman who stands in her worth becomes magnetic, not because she is trying to be, but because she has returned to her natural state. Unforced, grounded, self-respecting men fall for women who are aligned within themselves because that alignment feels safe, rare, and real. A woman in her power doesn't need validation to feel valued. She becomes her own source. And ironically, that is what makes a man feel drawn to her more deeply than ever before. She becomes the woman he cannot easily access, the woman who no longer bends, the woman who is no longer trying to prove anything. And because she is no longer emotionally dependent on the outcome, she becomes the woman he feels compelled to chase, not to control her, but to meet her at the level she now stands. In letting go, she doesn't lose him. She finds herself. And in finding herself, she becomes the kind of woman a man falls for with a seriousness he never felt before. When a woman chooses to create space, she awakens a natural instinct in a man that words, arguments, and emotional explanations could never trigger. Men are wired to value what feels rare, to pursue what feels meaningful, and to fight for what isn't easily accessible. But as long as she is constantly available, constantly present, constantly giving, he never fully experiences her rarity, because she becomes part of the routine, part of the background, part of the emotional landscape he assumes will always be there. The moment she steps back, the entire dynamic shifts. Her silence becomes the loudest signal he has ever heard. Her distance becomes the doorway through which he finally realizes what she meant to him. Space forces him to feel the difference between her presence and her absence. And that contrast awakens something primal inside him. Men may not always express their emotions the way women do, but they feel deeply when something meaningful is slipping away. When she stops responding immediately, when she stops reaching out first, when she stops pouring energy into a connection he was comfortable taking for granted, he begins to sense the loss. But the loss does not show up all at once. It creeps in slowly, quietly, consistently. It shows up when he goes through his day and something reminds him of her. It shows up when he laughs at something and realizes he wants to tell her. It shows up when he reaches for his phone and realizes she hasn't texted. It shows up when he faces a challenge and realizes she isn't there to comfort him. It shows up when he recognizes that the warmth she gave so freely is now locked behind her silence. This space triggers a man's instinct not just to pursue, but to reevaluate. He begins to ask himself questions he never asked when she was always around. Why did he withdraw? Why didn't he value her effort? Why did he wait for her to carry the emotional responsibility? Why did he allow himself to become passive with someone who genuinely cared? These questions lead him to a clarity that her presence alone could never create, because sometimes a man cannot see what is in front of him until it is no longer within reach. Space turns her from accessible to irreplaceable. It transforms her energy from familiar to rare. And rarity ignites desire. This is not about playing games. It is about honoring the natural balance of masculine and feminine energy. When she lets go and lives her life joyfully, fully, and confidently without him, he feels the shift. He feels the freedom in her. He feels the peace around her. He feels the glow returning to her spirit. And that glow, that renewed sense of self, is exactly what makes a man fall harder. It's not the loss of her body he fears, it is the loss of her essence, the loss of the softness she offered, the loss of the emotional home she built. When she steps back, he realizes that no one else makes him feel the way she did, and that realization awakens his instinct to pursue, not because she's gone, but because her absence finally made him see just how much she mattered. When a woman finally lets go, something remarkable happens. Not just in the relationship, but within her entire energy field. She becomes lighter in ways she didn't even realize she was heavy. She becomes freer in ways she didn't even realize she was trapped. All the emotional weight she carried, the overthinking, the overgiving, the worrying, the waiting, the hoping, begins to dissolve. And the more she releases the attachment to someone who didn't show up for her, the more she returns to herself. This return creates a kind of radiance that cannot be faked and cannot be ignored. Men feel this shift even before they consciously understand it. They sense the difference in her tone, in her presence, in the way she moves through the world. She is no longer burdened by the fear of losing him. She is no longer shrinking herself to be accepted. She is no longer bending to be chosen. And this liberation changes her energy entirely. A woman's true power is never in her effort to keep someone. It is in her ability to stay soft, loving, and open while still choosing herself when love becomes imbalanced. When she lets go, she reclaims the very parts of herself she had unconsciously handed over to the relationship. She reconnects with her joy, the small moments that make her heart light. She reconnects with her passions, the things that make her feel alive. She reconnects with her worth, the quiet truth that she deserves love that feels mutual, reciprocal, and nurturing. This internal rebirth creates a glow around her that others can see, even from afar. Men are incredibly sensitive to the emotional environment a woman creates. They may not always articulate it, but they feel it deeply. When she was stressed, anxious, or emotionally drained trying to keep the connection alive, he felt that energy. Maybe not enough to step up, but enough to unconsciously pull away. But when she lets go and rises back into her natural feminine strength, he feels that shift too. The pressure disappears. The intensity lightens. Her energy becomes warm rather than weary, inviting rather than demanding, peaceful rather than fearful. And this is when men start to gravitate back. It isn't her silence alone that pulls him. It's the transformation behind it. He sees her smiling more sincerely. He sees her living more boldly. He sees her engaging with the world instead of being stuck waiting for him. Her independence becomes attractive, not because she is rejecting him, but because she is reconnecting with herself. Men fall not for the woman who clings, but for the woman who glows. And a woman glows brightest when she is aligned with her truth. Letting go gives her energy back to her. And when her energy returns, her beauty evolves. This beauty isn't in makeup, clothes, or appearance. It is in her soul. It is in the peace she radiates, the confidence she carries, the way she walks with certainty instead of doubt. Men feel this shift deeply because it awakens something inside them. The realization that the version of her they are seeing now is the version they always needed, but failed to recognize. And that realization makes them fall harder than they ever did when she was holding on. When a woman finally stops overgiving and lets go, something powerful and deeply revealing happens, not to her, but to him. Because for so long, he may have confused the value of her effort with the value of who she truly was. He may have mistaken her patience for guarantee, her understanding for obligation, her forgiveness for weakness, and her consistency for permanence. He may have believed that because she loved him deeply, she would always stay available, no matter how little he invested back. But when she lets go, all of those illusions fall apart. Suddenly, he is left seeing her not through the lens of what she provided, but through the clarity of who she was all along. Her absence strips away the comfort of entitlement, and for the first time, he sees her true value, not the value of what she did for him, but the value of her worth as a woman. This is one of the most painful awakenings a man can experience, because while she was there, he thought her efforts were just part of her personality, part of her nature, part of what she was supposed to do. He didn't realize those actions were choices. Every text she sent was a choice. Every second chance she gave was a choice. Every time she softened a conflict instead of escalating it was a choice. Every moment she stayed when she could have walked away was a choice. And when she finally stops choosing him, he begins to realize how many moments she spent choosing him before he appreciated it. Letting go becomes the moment where she no longer negotiates with her self-worth. She stops trying to fix things single-handedly. She stops proving her loyalty to someone who questioned it. She stops explaining herself to someone who wasn't listening. She stops showing up for someone who didn't show up for her. And the moment she withdraws those efforts, her value becomes undeniable. Because her effort wasn't the measure of her worth, it was a demonstration of it. And now that she isn't giving it, he can finally see just how precious it was. A man can ignore effort when it is constant, but he cannot ignore the void it leaves behind. The silence becomes his lesson. The distance becomes his teacher, and her absence becomes the mirror he never wanted to look into. He starts to see the truth. She wasn't asking for too much. She was giving too much. And he wasn't overwhelmed by her love. He was unprepared for it. When she stops investing, he finally understands that she was the emotional foundation he relied on, the stability he never acknowledged, the softness he took for granted, and the loyalty he assumed would never waver. Men fall harder for the woman who lets them go because they realize too late that she wasn't replaceable, she wasn't predictable, she wasn't ordinary. She was the woman who loved him with depth, sincerity, devotion, and intention. And when she stopped, he learned the truth of her value not through her presence, but through the echo of her absence.